Today, I want to talk about Pluto and Pluto in relationship to shadow work. Hi, my name is Shari. I am a Western tropical astrologer, and welcome to Starwell Astrology. My focus on astrology has been more in its context to shadow work, although I am an astrologer and I do offer regular natal chart readings as well as one-on-one shadow work. My information is below. And also, if you like this content, please don't forget to hit the like button. But I would really love it if you would subscribe because it really does help my channel to grow. There are many layers of understanding oneself, and most of us are on the more superficial level, which is the part of us that's a personality. But if we really want to know ourselves at the deepest level, we need to look at Pluto in our natal charts because Pluto is going to require that we self-investigate and to face our darkest side, our shadow self, to really get to who we are at our core. There's plenty of information already about how to become a better version of oneself. And this is commonly what we will focus on when we say we want to, do self-improvement or self-development. And even when we do shadow work, we tend to do it more at a superficial layer, which is still developing the ego identity. And I know a lot of people get caught up in the word ego. I know that we're all egos, and in order to exist in this physical reality, we have to be an ego. Absolutely. But there are layers to this ego. The ego that is identified, and it's a program conditioned part of us, is based on our ascendant sign, and it is not really the truth of who we are because it is something we have become, something that we have been conditioned to believe we are. It is built based on expectations, based on our traditions and where we're born, and our race, our sexuality. And there's so many things that define this part of us. And so it has taken us away from our core essence, which is the I am presence and is the spiritual ego. Now, because we don't know what that is, because we've never had a chance to know what that is, it is something that we're not really conscious of that exists beneath the surface of the personality, which is what I call the ego identity or the self-image. So when we work with Pluto, Pluto is asking us to self-investigate, to get access to that hidden part of us that we are not really aware of. And when we become aware of it, it feels very unfamiliar. But to get to that part of us, we first have to go through our shadow side. And the shadow side is what blocks us from getting to this deeper layer within us. And this is the point of shadow work. First of all, this shadow side is something that veils us from our core essence. And if you've watched my previous video, I explain about what the core essence is and that it is ruled by the sun, and the sun is our authentic self. Now, we have become conditioned, like I said, to live in alignment with our ascendant sign, which is the ego or the personality, the self-image, or the mask we wear. There's so many names to call this, but all of this is ego at different levels. When most of us say we're ready to work on healing ourselves, we tend to go for the superficial layer, the part where we're reprogramming the ego identity or personality. And we want to get to know more about ourselves, but we want to do this by, reprogramming the part of us that we are familiar with, that we believe we are. But Pluto wants us to really get to know thyself. And to do this, it requires that we do some deep internal self-investigation, and it requires that we face our shadows. Now, this is a critical question that we need to ask ourselves if we really are going to work with Pluto and do shadow work. The reason we need to ask these critical questions as far as what are we really going for when we say we're doing self-healing. Are we working on our personality, or are we working on a deeper level, the part of us that is actually our soul, but most of us are not comfortable with the word, with calling ourselves a soul. So I'm going to say it's our core essence. And the reason we should find this out is because it will determine the stage or level we will be able to heal at. And the truth is that most of us are focused on refining our conditioned ego identity, believing that self-awareness means striving to become a better version of ourselves. While self-improvement is valuable, it does not equate to deep self-knowledge. Now, there is nothing wrong with wanting to learn more about our personality so that we can improve. As a matter of fact, this is what we commonly do, and I certainly have for many years. But we should know that when we're working at that level, even if we're practicing shadow work, if we're not going beneath that to our Pluto level, we are still working on the ego identity. If we're focused on doing the healing work based on improving our conditioned identity, then this is fine. But it is not the deepest layer that real shadow work can reveal, and it certainly is not what it means to know thyself. If you want to know thyself, then we're working with Pluto's potential to transform the lead of the ego into the goal of our soul. When we are working with Pluto, we will start to grasp the stark difference between working on a level of the personality to become a better version of oneself and the actual purification process of the inner alchemy that unfolds through automatically healing our wounded past, which is attached to our karma and our interdimensionality. However, most are satisfied with understanding ourselves at the level of the personality. But if you're still listening to this, I would imagine that you're ready for more. Unfortunately, for most of us, it usually takes a major challenge for us to be ready to know the difference. When the new version or the part of us, the personality that we've developed into, falls apart in the middle of adversities, then we realize that those new skills that we have gained are not enough to cope. And at that point, we might be ready to say, okay, so what am I missing? So at this point, there might be a readiness to ask, is there more to this self-development? Because what I've done seems to only hold up temporarily. And when we're facing a major crisis, then we start to wonder what it is. What are we missing? The truth is that when we're working with our personality, we're not working with our core essence. The personality, which is a conditioned self-image, or what I call the ego identity, blocks us from knowing who we are at our core. Now, to get answers to what it is that we're missing, we need to first understand that most times, because we're working with our personality and not at our core essence, then the personality is what tends to block us from knowing who we are at our core essence. The personality tends to overlay and overshadow who we are at a soul level. And this has been something that we've learned all our lives, and to disregard who we are at our most authentic level and allow the personality to operate as an outer layer and expression of ourselves. But as we realize that this part of us is very delicate and tender and a lot of times can't withstand difficult situations, then we start to want to know, who are we really if we are not this personality that has taken the lead role? We might ask, what is this authentic self that we're overlooking? Well, this authentic self is very subtle. It is ever present within us always. And when we get to know ourselves through healing Pluto in our natal chart, we get a deeper understanding of this pure essence of who we are. But like I said, Pluto wants us first to face our darkness, which happens through doing the deepest level of shadow work. Pluto is the gateway to the divine within us, and he guards the gates to our inner divinity. And we cannot go through this gateless gate unless we're willing to face him in the underworld. If life is good, we have no desire to face Pluto, the god of the underworld, because why? Why would we? We don't want to see our own darknesses. If everything is great, why would we even consider this? But he tends to give us a crisis to inspire us to face ourselves, which is the same as facing Pluto. We avoid looking at our dark side to focus instead on the externals, and that includes protecting our conditioned self-image, which is created to be the protective shield that usually fails when things get tough. To know the self behind the mask is not an easy and comfortable thing to do. We avoid it like the plague because, first of all, it's unfamiliar territory and we don't know what we might find behind our masks. What if we don't like what we see? These are just the fears and phobias of Pluto that will bring up these questions about who we are, and we begin to fear it because looking within feels frightening and unfamiliar. The house that Pluto is located in will also show us our hidden fears and phobias. So you can check your natal chart, find out what house Pluto falls in, and it will give you more insight on the things that you will fear the most and what you could work on healing. Pluto is asking us to look at our wounded self, our shadow self that operates unconsciously through a personality or self-image. And this requires facing our fears and phobias and trusting that what's behind the mask we're conditioned to wear, and trusting that what's behind the mask, who we are at our core essence, is way better than what we think we are right now. We might have some faith in ourselves to know that our core essence is not a demon. We are all made up at our deepest level of pure peace and unconditional love. However, we must confront the monster inside of us that have guarded the gates to our true self, and this is Pluto. Pluto guards the gate of the underworld. Pluto is the key planet because he represents the buried emotional wounds that we need to excavate, and to excavate them brings up fears and phobias to the point that we have created a shadow self. Now, the shadow self appears to be a monster lurking in the shadows, but they are really just old impressions of our past wounds that are stuck in an unconscious, locked into unconscious memories, and it's holding on to unprocessed fears, guilt, shame, rejection, abuse, rage, and injustices. These wounds represent what has been done to us, but also what we might have done to others. Sometimes in this current life, but usually has a connection to past lives or our ancestry line, and even collectively. We carry the wounds of wars, massacres, slavery, rape, violence, and the most unspeakable things within us through our bloodline, whether we want to agree or not. Our DNA or bloodline is linked to our ancestry line, and the blood carries the wounded memories in our soul. The soul's memory exists in our blood. We want to pretend that these things never happened, or since it happened in the distant past, then it's forgotten. And worse, we want to pretend that it's not happening in the world today. But truth be told, it is still happening because it is linked to our past memories of unhealed wounding that cannot be released by just ignoring and suppressing these wounds. They end up being recreated because it's energy that we must express, even if it's suppressed or unconscious in us. So this cycle will continue unless we start to heal. We want to believe that since we're not the ones committing these atrocities, that we cannot be affected. But truth is that we are all one at our core. We come from one thing. So we cannot escape our interdependence and interconnections. Pluto rules self-empowerment. So when we choose to work with him, we become empowered. We become powerful beings that have access to our inner divinity, because he shows us that we hold the power to heal ourselves should we decide to face him in the dark, deep, unconscious shadow self. He holds the power to heal on all levels, even when we personally have nothing to do with the atrocities of the past. We hold the key to ourselves, and since we are all one, if we do our part to release our wounds, then we, in turn, affect the whole. It breaks the cycle. Pluto is regarded as the god of the underworld that we must go through to reach to the other side of ourselves. And he is the god of Hades that we must face in order to be transformed. Pluto rules the deep undercurrents of the psyche that we would rather keep buried in the unconscious. Pluto is not an easy planet to work with, but when he opens the gates to the other side of us, we are reborn, therefore healed of our wounded self. And these wounds are no longer unconsciously controlling how we behave. Pluto is related to the deepest shadow work we can do for ourselves. And when we are working with Pluto, we get access to the hidden and repressed aspects of the self. When Pluto is activated in the natal chart, he will often bring a crisis, an intense situation in our lives. Pluto activates power struggles such as shameful situations, feeling disempowered. He rules death, whether literally or metaphorically. He can bring life-threatening illnesses and take us to the brink. Pluto rules violence and abusive situations. We can suddenly be facing homelessness or loss of income. Pluto brings up our deepest fears and phobias. But Pluto also has a positive side, such as the ability to lead others and to have power and dominance and control over others. Pluto is a magnetic energy that can attract great wealth, but his power comes with great responsibility. Otherwise, we will abuse the power that we are given. So the best way to work with Pluto is to meet him in the underworld and face all our demons. We must see that major crises gives us an opportunity to work with ourselves. It is not possible to avoid working with Pluto. Otherwise, he will bring destruction to our lives because he is a destructive force. And unless we learn to meet him where he is and confront ourselves so that we can transform through a rebirthing process, then Pluto will destroy us. Pluto will cut us down to our knees. He'll bring us down to our lowest place where things become uncomfortable and unbearable. And he wants to bring us to a breaking point where we have no choice but to move through the darkness. And of course, we can get stuck in that darkness if we're not willing to work with the oppressions of Pluto. He demands that we transform. And if we choose to work with him, then the outcome can be favorable. Otherwise, our emotional wounds can consume us to the point that we turn to addictions, destructive behavior, violence, suicide. So we might be faced with our own mortality. The way to work with Pluto is to face our emotional wounds, and this is certainly not easy, and it does take a certain amount of readiness. But Pluto's way of forcing us to work with him, even if we resist, is to bring intense situations that will disrupt our lives. And that's how we have to look at our disruptions that we experience in our lives, is that Pluto is giving us an invitation to work with him. And it's not going to be an easy and pleasant situation, but one that is well worth it. However, if we work with Pluto, we get access to the transformative energies and powers that he wields to heal us. In shadow work, we must learn to face ourselves with complete openness and compassion, because the work is to accept all that we see in ourselves. We cannot reject any part, no matter how much we might want to avoid facing our pain. Whatever surfaces emotionally is what we're ready to heal. We need to allow our wounded parts to surface and to face them so that they can be integrated as a part of us. Therefore, the darkness or our shadow self is no longer controlling us unconsciously. Sometimes we can do this on our own, but sometimes we need a little help from a shadow work coach such as myself, or even in a few instances, a trained professional is needed, but this really depends on the level of trauma and one's ability to process their own pain. However, I can say that it's highly unlikely that we would even be open and willing to work with Pluto if we're not ready to face the wounds within. The desire to heal on this level is really a call of the soul, and therefore, the angelic and spiritual realms are ready to assist with this inner alchemy. So you're not really left on your own, but you have to open to the invitations of the angelic realms so that they can assist you as you're ready to heal. When we're ready to heal, we get access to communications with our spirit world that will also gives us synchronicities and symbols and signs and omens. If we pay attention, they can show us something that we were unaware of before, that we've become aware of now and can now potentially heal. When we are ready to heal at this level, it is really not coming from our personal desires. The ego identity, meaning the personality that wants to improve, it is much deeper. It is the level of transformation that happens on a physiological level. And I call this the inner alchemy. Because the soul's desire or urge for healing is an urgent call that we can't miss. This is an energetic influence of Pluto. When we work with Pluto at this level, through the practice of shadow work, we're working with divine will. Pluto rules divine will, which is the highest level that we have access to while here on Earth. Pluto in astrology is our soul, but he is the soul that is trapped in a physical body that is tied in bondage to its past. And this is why he is regarded as the god of the underworld, because he holds the key to our soul's liberation if we're willing to transform. Pluto rules desires, but it is not the personal desires. That would be Venus. He rules the soul's desires, the desire to transform at a soul level through the purification process and inner refinement of spiritual alchemy that comes when we start to work on the wounded past and remove that burdened part of ourselves, to unburden our souls and start to recover from our karmic wounds. When Pluto opens the door, it's best to walk through, because although he brings major destruction in our lives, if we choose to ignore his desire to work with us, we'll only suffer more. Because, like I said, he's a very destructive force. And Pluto doesn't leave things standing. He demolishes everything and he'll wipe out everything. Now, this is tough work, but it's the work of Pluto. He's not about pleasantries such as bubbles and unicorns and rainbows. He wants inner transformation and rebirth at a soul level. In other words, there is a deep internal shift at a psychological level that is life altering when we work with Pluto. We are purging the soul's karma and unburdening lifetimes of unprocessed and unhealed wounds that are ready to be purged and released at a soul level. We have been taught to avoid our fears and weaknesses, and yet it is what holds our deepest strengths when we bring them up for healing. Pluto allows us to transform through a shift in our perspective on reality, through a higher awareness of who we are at a core level. Pluto supersedes all previous desires, and now there's a desire to heal. And we do this by facing the emotional truth buried beneath the surface, and we excavate the unconscious wounded self that has sabotaged our chances for transformation and rebirth into the liberated self. So thank you for listening. I hope you'll consider subscribing and liking. It helps my channel to grow. Again, I do offer natal chart readings, regular natal chart readings, and one-on-one shadow work if you're interested. And my information is just below this video. Thank you for joining me. Hope to see you next time. Goodbye.